Who on the Philadelphia Eagles needs to step up this year? It was a question asked on the Philly Influencer podcast this past week. Sean went around the room and he asked everybody to give a name. So if you watch the podcast, you already know who my name is going to be. But if you didn't, well, I'm going to tell you in a second. All right. See, here's the thing about this Eagles roster. If you go down it, how many of you guys actually had down years? Because half of the roster, in all reality, had career seasons. Carson Wentz played like an MVP in his second year before going down with his ACL injury. Zach Ertz finally broke out. Lane Johnson was awesome. Brandon Brooks might have had a career year. Jason Kelce played the best football of his career. Stefan Wisniewski was amazing. Big V stepped up in Jason Peters' absence. You go on the other side of the ball. Fletcher Cox was bringing it. Brandon Graham is aging like a fine wine. Nigel Bradham continues to be underrated in the landscape of NFL linebackers. Malcolm Jenkins continues to play good football. So I've got one name for you guys, and there's actually two I think that can be discussed. I'll get to the second name, I guess, maybe later in the video. But for right now, my one name that I answered for that question on the podcast, it is Ronald Darby, cornerback, who had 3 interceptions last year in about half a season. Because if you remember, he dislocated his ankle in week 1 against Washington. 3 interceptions is a lot for a guy who really doesn't have great ball skills. He's not a guy that's going to high point it. He doesn't have the best hands in the world. But he had 3 of them last year, 9 passes defensed. So off-ball guy, great speed, quickness, and good instincts too. So if you run a quick slant, he's got the quickness and the recognition skills to read that, make the play, pass break up. But he's also the same guy who bites on a sluggo. So a lot of double moves. That has been a problem for him throughout his NFL career. Double moves, the sluggos. We saw it all of last year. So the thing about this dislocated ankle, because we're answering a question, the Eagles need a better year from blank. And that ankle, you can make the argument that, okay, maybe it had deterred his play last year a little bit. He didn't play to his fullest of capabilities. And that's the thing with some of these injuries. Like an ACL, for example. Some players, they're not back to 100% until halfway through the season. That might happen with Carson Wentz. We'll see. It's all about how much you trust, the foot or the knee that you injured. How much do you trust it? Are you showing a lack of hesitancy? Because if you're hesitant, then all of a sudden we got some problems. But if you're lacking that hesitancy, okay, all right, then you're back to being who you were before. An Achilles injury. Jordan Hicks is going through this again. And they say with Achilles injuries, it takes a full year for you to get back to 100%. So Jordan Hicks on a contract year, coming off an Achilles injury, he may not fare well this year. Because that's what the studies show. That's what history shows. Some players defy history, like Adrian Peterson. But the point is, he came back midway through the year on a dislocated ankle that was gruesome in week 1 against Washington. We all immediately assumed he was out for the year when we saw that because his foot was hanging like this. So coming back from an injury like that as a cornerback, was Ronald Darby having those doubts when he was out there on the football field? Is he not going to be 100% until he lines up week 1? Because, yeah, that was a brutal injury. But he did also have his flashes. Because I thought by the end of the year, by the time Oakland came around, which was week 16, I thought he did really well there. Had a really strong game. He had that big interception that led to the field goal from Jake Elliott that won it. Struggled big time in the Super Bowl, though. My God, the entire secondary did. 500 yards of offense plus yards of offense for that Patriots offense. Pressure struggled to get to Brady, and he just picked the Eagles' defense apart. That's what happened in the Super Bowl. But Ronald Darby is my name. And there's two key things to look for here this season, too, if Ronald Darby plays really well. Because I think him playing well is important for the secondary. And him playing well and being important, that's why I have him on as the answer to this question and not the other guy that I'll tell you in a second. So, Ronald Darby, great speed, quickness, off-ball corner. He's going to jump on the quick slants. He's going to bite on the double moves. But he can compete. I'll use the word compete with number one wide receivers. This is a contract year for Ronald Darby. Free agent at the end of the year. Eagles right now are actually in the red for next year's salary cap. So, because he's a free agent at the end of the year, I think we're going to see the best out of Ronald Darby for that reason alone. We all know how players fare in their contract years. We saw Timmy Jernigan last year. Then he got paid and, well, it didn't turn out so well for him. But obviously he was also dealing with the injury. So because he was dealing with the injury, that's why he's actually not the guy that I was going to name for this question. Though we see that all the time. But Ronald Darby right now, heading into a contract year, he's got to be motivated. And if he plays well, it just shapes everything else up in the secondary. Because if you have Ronald Darby excel, if you have Sidney Jones play up to what his expectations are, if you have that solid duo right there, all of a sudden you can experiment in your secondary because you got a lot of depth now at cornerback. Who would have thought a year ago we'd be talking about depth at cornerback? Because Rasul Douglas showed signs as a rookie, too. And I've talked about it before with some videos in the past, like last week or two. I want Jalen Mills to potentially move to safety. Not necessarily move to safety, but play both cornerback and safety, offering positional versatility. I want him to kind of play a little bit of that Corey Graham role. Near the end of the season last year when Graham was playing 60% of the snaps in the playoffs. So maybe see him line up in the slot a little bit, make some tackles. You could even have Jalen Mills as a linebacker at times, play what Malcolm Jenkins did. So if Ronald Darby excels this year, all of a sudden everything works out in the secondary, I think. If he struggles, all of a sudden, okay, maybe Sidney Jones is your number one, but counting on a rookie to be the number one, as high as I am on Sidney Jones, all of a sudden you got some, kind of a little bit of question marks in the secondary. And then all of a sudden you got to have Jalen Mills as your other starter, and you have no depth at safety. So I think if Ronald Darby fares well this year, it just opens up everything and opens up a lot more possibilities for the Eagles in the secondary. So, speaking of the secondary, that's where the second guy, the second answer for this video, Rodney McLeod. Dude, you got to start taking some better angles this year. All right, I get it. All right, I get it. You're playing single high. It's hard to take the right angle and to make that tackle in space with a wide receiver or a running back who's coming at you in full speed. All right, safeties miss tackles. It's part of the game. But you don't miss as many tackles as you do, Rodney. A quick slant should not go 80 yards to the house. So, Rodney McLeod, back end of that defense, if he struggles, the Eagles really don't have any answers in that spot. They have some safeties that can do what Malcolm Jenkins can do, but playing as a single high, I don't know if they have another one. Rasul Douglas, okay, maybe. But you're not going to just throw Rasul Douglas out there as a single high safety in the middle of the season. That's just not going to happen. Maybe you experiment that with next year, but I don't think you would. So those are my two guys, my two answers for this question. Ronald Darby, Rodney McLeod, Eagles secondary. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Who needs to step up for the Birds in 2019? I'm Adrian Fedkiw. Take care.